The Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Luke. On one occasion, when Jesus was going to the house of a leader of the Pharisees to eat a meal on the Sabbath, they were watching him closely. When he noticed how the guests chose the places of honor, he told them a parable. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not sit down at the place of honor, in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited by your host. And the host who invited both of you may come and say to you, "Give this person your place." And then, in disgrace, you would start to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit down at the lowest place, so that when the host comes, he may say to you, "Friend, move up higher." Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. He said also to the one who had invited him, "When you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, in case they may invite you in return, and you would be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
In the name of the one holy and living God, amen. Well, hey, y'all. How you been? Good. For those who just started with St. Barnabas this summer, hi, I'm Erika. I've been on sabbatical this summer, and so it's okay that you don't recognize me. Though this summer had my 13th year anniversary of being at St. Barnabas, so I've been around for a minute, and it's really good to be home. My family and I had a wonderful summer. We got to spend 5 weeks in Minnesota, where I'm from, with my parents and siblings and lots of old friends. Then we moved to Washington, D.C. for 3 weeks, where we got to borrow a friend's home in the city and go exploring and see all sorts of things, which was wonderful. I remembered that I don't miss humidity at all, not even in the slightest. So that was doubly good to be home. I learned some Spanish over the summer, so I'm continuing to work on that, and that feels like a cool thing I got to do. My last trip of the summer was a week in New York City, and and one of the things there is the experience I want to share with you today. The highlight was I was a theater major in my undergrad, so the highlight was going to Broadway. And my sister and I saw Come From Away. Has anybody seen this show? Oh, good. That makes my sermon more interesting for everyone then. Come From Away, it's about this little town called Gander, Newfoundland. And it's a town of about 9,500 people on the edge of the Atlantic with an enormous airport because it was the last place for planes to gas up before they crossed the Atlantic. Now, with the advent of planes that could fly all the way, Gander no longer really needed that enormous airport, but it was more cost-effective to just leave it as is than to tear it down and build something smaller. But But then after these new planes were built, then they started seeing maybe like 6 planes a day. They saw everybody and everything for the longest time, and then it turned into just this very few. Well, so Come From Away is the story of this town who on September 11th, 2001, after American airspace was closed due to the terrorist attacks, received 38 planes in one day, carrying nearly 7,000 people, all of whom had nowhere to go. The people who were traveling were forced to remain on the planes for 28 hours on the runway. And in the meantime, the town got to work. They found food. They found baby supplies. They found pet food in case there were animals in storage. They found clothes for people. They put the pharmacies on standby in case people's medications were in their luggage and they couldn't get to things. And as the people were finally allowed to walk off the planes, they were met with this entire town of people pressing food into their hands, handing them sweaters and hygiene supplies. They were taken to every building in town that could sleep any amount of people. The school buses had been on strike, and the drivers came off strike so that they could help transport people to where they needed to go. People took individuals home for showers, took them to the local pub for a pint, and walked with them as they awaited news of loved ones in Washington and New York and beyond. And over, the refrain in the show was, "Thank you. I just can't believe you're doing all of this for us." And without hesitation, the people of Gander said, "You'd do the same for us. You'd do the same for us." Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing that, some have entertained angels without knowing it. Do not neglect to do good and to share what you have, for such sacrifices are pleasing to God. These words from Hebrews seem to sing the story of Come From Away. Has there ever been such hospitality to strangers as was provided by the people of Gander? The letter, though, of course, comes from a different time, some 2,000 years before. It was an exhortation, a homily. The letter to the Hebrews is intended to bolster the congregation who was sure of God's return and that it was imminent, but they were growing discouraged. This passage today is part of the closing verses of the book, imploring them to lead meaningful lives, even in the midst of the pain of the waiting, the pain of the wanting. So, serve those in prison. Honor your marriage in body and spirit. Don't get obsessed with money. Stay focused forward. Stay calm. Don't let the anxiety of the wait get the better of you. The kingdom will come. Keep straining toward it. Don't get lost in the discouragement. The author wrote it because they knew how hard it was. They knew the pain of the wait, of the wanting to see the fruition of their hope, the urgent need to see Jesus return with their own eyes, to see the kingdom finally come. We hear now we might know a thing or two about kingdoms not yet come. Huh? We all see the pain in the world, don't we? A lot of people are in unimaginable pain all over. And there's a lot of people who would have us be divided and in pain as a world rather than united in bonds of peace and love. I've been finding that nowadays, whenever I'm in a conversation where something terrible comes up and people say, why did that person do that thing? The only response I seem able to give is fear and pain. They did that out of their fear, out of their pain. We all make our worst decisions, our least compassionate decisions, our most selfish decisions, always out of fear and out of pain. Feels like a lot of that fear and pain rules the day right now. And so if you're like me, then you might hear this passage about showing hospitality to strangers because they might just be angels, Maybe you get a little uncomfortable like me, because I'm not immune. I've got fear and pain too. And there's some strangers who, if I'm honest, I don't know if I particularly care to find out whether they're angels or not. It's too scary to try and find out. Anybody else? But now that I've seen this lovely show, I find their refrain echoing in my body, calling me to account. You would do the same for us. Would I? Could I? I think many of us know that in the adrenaline of an emergency situation, there are those of us who can perform superhuman feats. They can put the fear aside and charge in. But the question that keeps haunting me is, what about the rest of the time? What about the everyday decisions that I make that affect others for good or ill? How can I focus on my own hospitality towards others in the everyday, mundane choices? How can I see the angels that live within those who cause me fear or pain and give them my hospitality anyway? I think Jesus wants to show us the way in this passage from Luke today. Don't know what it is to show hospitality to strangers? Give them the best seat in the house, Jesus says. Give them the honor of your respect. Don't take it for yourself. Be humbled. The nitty-gritty of this instruction from Jesus is that we do indeed deal with our own fear and pain on a constant basis. What's that number? 90% of the people are in distress 90% of the time. That's the reality. And so part of the work that we have to do is to recognize our own fear and pain, and then recognize what that causes humans to do when they're in it. What's the turn of phrase from the olden days? Circle the wagons. We circle up, don't we? When we're in fear and pain, we draw in closer. We only want what we know is safe and secure. We close out the rest of the world. And when the circle is small, well, then we maybe get to feel like we're in a little bit of control of something, anything. We're allowed to make some assumptions about who's around us, about who belongs and who doesn't belong. Hence our creation of social stratification that leads to Jesus having to teach this in the first place. It's society deeming who is important and worthy of a place at the table and who is not. And then we seat the people at the tables based on who's been deemed important. That's why Jesus was such a revelation. He told people no. Reject those circles. Open those circles. Smash the walls that keep people apart. Put us all back together again as equals at the table. To follow Jesus is to live every day with the knowledge that we are no worse than or any better than any other human being on the planet. It doesn't matter if we've lived a spotless existence our whole life. Jesus doesn't love us any more than anyone else. You are an angel to be welcomed, as is every other soul on earth. When we start seeing that, when we start acting like that, in our homes, in our workplaces, in our world, then perhaps we're making room for the kingdom to finally come. But it starts when we know about our fear and pain, because you can't defeat an enemy you don't see or acknowledge. So to me, that looks like maybe we're in a new situation. Maybe you're having that moment of being in that new situation and finding yourself uncomfortable or awkward, or maybe getting a little angry, maybe frustrated that you have to be in it, and you want to leave, and you can go, wait a minute, what is this really? What is this feeling really? What am I afraid of here? Why do I feel threatened by this moment? really digging in and getting curious about the emotions that are happening within us. If I'm feeling threatened, is it a real threat? Or is it a threat I've been led to believe? Or is it a threat that I've made up somehow? Because any of the three could be possible at any given time about any situation, any person, any place. And so when we look and dig in a little deeper to really understand what our circumstances are, to know what that fear and pain is and where it comes from, then we can help ourselves get over a hump to try and understand and know it's okay to be nervous. It's okay to be uncomfortable. It doesn't mean that I'm necessarily in danger, and I can try this. I can try this and it's okay. It sounds so simple when you say it, doesn't it? But all of us have to walk those steps sometimes because it's a fearful world. And so much of the world would have us believe we should be afraid of everybody and everything, when in fact, we're all in it together. The people of Gander, Newfoundland, were told that they'd be receiving planes destined for all over the world with God knows who on board. They could have hidden in their homes and let those people sit on the runway for a week. Now that we hear the story and are inspired about it, we think, oh no, they'd never do that. But they could have made that choice instead of the one they did. The planes were there because of a terrorist attack, after all. Instead, before they'd even deplaned, before they even landed, Gander said, these are people who need us. They would do the same for us. So they may have been afraid. They may have had pain. They were not always at their best, I'm sure. But in banding together as a community, they were able to transform their fear and pain into a collective goodness, into a courage, into a compassion and grace and love, the likes of which those people couldn't have imagined while they sat there and waited. The people of Gander became a church. See, a church chooses to become a church because a group of people band together as followers of love. Love over fear, compassion over pain. Make no mistake, it's a choice that has to be made again and again and again. But it's that we are making that choice repeatedly that makes us the most powerful force in the world. We are a body who will point ourselves toward love if it's the last thing we do. We will not always do it well. In fact, we fail mightily on a regular basis. But the fear and pain won't keep us down. We will love. We will love. We will bring the kingdom. We are made to do it. They would do the same for us. He has done the same for us. Hasn't our God provided the most loving hospitality to our broken selves over and over and over again at the table of grace? He has entertained each of us as though we are angels. If we let it, that will humble us enough to keep adding seats at the table too, to keep opening our doors, to keep loving. So the invitation is to do the work, to find your fear, to find what's your pain. Everyone has some. It is not just for some, so you'll be in great company as you do the work. I promise we'll be in it together. But it's only by knowing that enemy of fear and pain that rules us that we can open our arms of hospitality and start to see the world as filled with the angels that God has sent us in every single soul. They won't be strangers anymore, and the kingdom will come. You would do the same for us, they said. Let us do the same for them. Amen.